I think it's safe to say that change is on my agenda. Change for good. And I embrace that and I enjoy that change. I don't fear it.
The ancient stones of Windsor Castle have witnessed centuries of royal drama, from the turbulent reign of Henry VII to the abdication crisis of Edward VII. But on a damp autumn afternoon in 2026, within the private reception rooms of this historic fortress, a confrontation unfolded that would echo far beyond its gilded walls. It was not a battle between kings or a dispute over succession. It was a clash between two young girls, one a princess born to the purple, the other a granddaughter of the Queen Consort, whose conflict would expose fractures that had been quietly spreading through the House of Windsor for years. The story begins not with raised voices or overturned furniture, but with a single piece of jewelry, a bracelet that had once belonged to Diana, Princess of Wales. This was no ordinary heirloom. It was a tangible connection to a woman whose memory still haunts the corridors of power, a symbol of love, loss, and the enduring legacy of the people's princess. For Princess Charlotte, it was a link to a grandmother she had never known, a tangible reminder of a woman whose photograph occupied a place of honor in her bedroom. For Eliza Lopez, it was a symbol of everything she believed she could never have, a glittering testament to a world that had accepted her grandmother but still held her at arm's length. To understand the significance of what transpired that afternoon, one must first appreciate the weight of the setting. Windsor Castle is not merely a royal residence, it is a living monument to British history. Its round tower, perched on a chalk hill, has stood for over 9 centuries. Its state apartments are adorned with paintings by Rembrandt and Rubens. Its corridors have been walked by monarchs, warriors, and statesmen. Yet on this day, the most significant drama was unfolding in a modest reception room, far from the grandeur of St. George's Chapel or the opulence of the state dining room. The room itself was a study in understated elegance. Walls paneled in oak, worn smooth by centuries of cleaning, reflected the soft glow of a crystal chandelier. A fire crackled in the marble hearth, casting dancing shadows across the faces of the room's occupants. Outside, rain streaked the leaded windows, blurring the manicured lawns of the gardens beyond. The atmosphere was heavy, charged with the kind of tension that precedes a thunderstorm. Princess Charlotte, at just 9 years old, already carried herself with the poise of someone who understood that the eyes of the world were upon her. Her auburn hair, reminiscent of her great-grandmother's, was neatly brushed. Her posture, drilled into her by years of etiquette lessons, was impeccable. But on this day, that composure had cracked. Her shoulders trembled, her breath came in ragged gasps, her eyes, usually bright with curiosity, were clouded with fear and confusion. Eliza Lopez, 2 years older, possessed none of Charlotte's royal polish but compensated with a fierce pride born of her grandmother's position. Queen Camilla's long and often painful journey from the third person, in a marriage to the Queen Consort, had been closely watched by Eliza. She had grown up hearing stories of how her grandmother had been vilified by the press, excluded from royal events, and shunned by members of the establishment. She had also watched Camilla's triumphant return, her gradual acceptance, and her eventual elevation to the highest ranks of the British aristocracy. From this, Eliza had learned a powerful lesson. Persistence and patronage could overcome even the most entrenched barriers. The gathering itself had been designed as a gesture of family unity, a private reception, away from the cameras and the relentless scrutiny of the media, intended to allow the younger generation of the extended royal family to interact without the weight of protocol or public expectation. It was the kind of event that William and Catherine had championed, a subtle modernization of the monarchy's approach to family life. But in their desire to foster connection, they had inadvertently created a crucible. Tensions between Charlotte and Eliza had been simmering for months. Theirs was not a sudden animosity, but a slow, corrosive feud born of jealousy, favoritism, and the toxic undercurrent of unspoken resentments. It had begun at a heritage ceremony at Clarence House, a seemingly innocuous event where Charlotte had been selected to carry a family heirloom, while Eliza was quietly moved out of the ceremonial line. The slight, though small, had been deeply felt. In the quiet corridor outside the ceremonial room, Eliza had leaned close to Charlotte and whispered, "You only get chosen because everyone is afraid of your father." The words were spoken softly, but their impact was immediate and devastating. Charlotte, who had been raised to believe that she would be judged on her own merits, had been blindsided by the suggestion that she was merely a reflection of her father's power. She had looked at Eliza, her eyes wide with hurt. Eliza had seen the pain in her expression but had not apologized. No adult had witnessed the exchange, no one had intervened, and a fragile trust had been irrevocably shattered. Charlotte carried the weight of that whispered insult for weeks. At night, she would lay awake in her bed at Kensington Palace, wondering if Eliza was right. Did people respect her only because of her father's position? Would her accomplishments ever be seen as her own? She had asked her mother, Catherine, about it, carefully veiling her question in hypothetical terms. Catherine, ever perceptive, had sensed the unease beneath the words and had reassured her daughter that respect was earned through kindness and duty, not through birthright. But the doubt had already taken root. Eliza, meanwhile, had returned home nursing her own grievances. She had told her grandmother, Queen Camilla, that she had been humiliated in front of the other children, pushed aside without warning and made to feel invisible. Camilla, who had spent decades fighting for her own place within the royal hierarchy, had been deeply troubled by her granddaughter's distress. She had comforted Eliza, promised her that she would never again be excluded without explanation, and had set in motion a series of events that would prove catastrophic. In the weeks that followed, Camilla had quietly requested a formal ceremonial title for Eliza. Such titles, known as household honors, are granted by the sovereign to relatives and close companions of the royal family. They carry no constitutional authority, but they bestow a significant degree of prestige and access. They are a way of integrating extended family members into the royal fold, of signaling their acceptance by the inner circle. The application for Eliza's title had been processed through a small household committee while William was overseas. Camilla had personally recommended her granddaughter, and the committee, eager to please the Queen Consort, had approved the request without full scrutiny. It was a procedural shortcut that would later prove catastrophic. When William finally reviewed the documentation upon his return, he had been surprised and disturbed. The title had been granted, he discovered, without a full family conduct review, an internal check designed to examine behavior before ceremonial status was awarded. What was more, the timing of the grant, immediately after the heritage ceremony dispute, suggested a deliberate act of reinforcement, a way of protecting Eliza from the consequences of her words. For William, this was a revelation that cut to the heart of his concerns about the direction of the monarchy. He had long been uneasy about what he saw as the expansion of Camilla's influence within the royal household, the quiet maneuvering that sought to elevate her relatives without proper accountability. He had been patient, careful, and strategic, but this, he believed, was a step too far. The confrontation at Windsor that afternoon was, in many ways, a microcosm of a larger struggle. Eliza, emboldened by her new title, had grown increasingly dismissive of Charlotte's position. She mocked the restrictions and protocol that governed the princess's life, suggesting that Charlotte's royal future was more a prison than a privilege. For months, she had chipped away at Charlotte's confidence, eroding her sense of self-worth with whispered insults and deliberate exclusion. On that fateful afternoon, the conflict reached its breaking point. Eliza had snatched the bracelet from Charlotte's wrist, demanding that the princess prove that she was untouchable. Charlotte, who had been raised to understand that royal position carried responsibility, not impunity, had been taken aback by the challenge. She had demanded that Eliza return the bracelet. Eliza had refused. A chair had been knocked over, voices had risen, and then William was there. The Prince of Wales, the future King of England, had moved swiftly to protect his daughter. He had knelt beside Charlotte, his voice low and steady, urging her to explain what had happened. But fear had caught in her throat, and the silence that followed had fundamentally changed something in William. His expression, usually so carefully neutral, had tightened into something far more formidable. He had seen the overturn of the chair, the missing bracelet, and Eliza standing a few steps away with her arms defiantly folded, and he had understood immediately that this was no childhood quarrel. It was a battle. Catherine had moved to her daughter's side, her hand resting protectively on Charlotte's shoulder. She had not spoken. Her presence was a silent reminder that this was about far more than a single incident. It was a test of loyalties, a confrontation that had been building for months. A young palace attendant who had witnessed the exchange had provided a detailed account to the household secretary. The testimony painted a disturbing picture. Eliza had not only mocked Charlotte's position, but had deliberately blocked her path and snatched the bracelet from her wrist. It was an act of calculated cruelty, not a moment of childish impulsiveness. William listened to the evidence, his jaw tightening with controlled fury. He ordered the doors closed, determined to prevent anyone from leaving until the full truth had been uncovered. It was a dramatic gesture, one that signaled the seriousness of the situation. The revocation of Eliza's title followed swiftly. William made it clear that her actions had consequences and that no amount of family influence could shield her from accountability. Her name was struck from the guest list. Her ceremonial privileges were rescinded. She was barred from future youth engagements. Camilla arrived shortly after the decision had been made. Her face was a mask of controlled anger. She had been prepared to defend her granddaughter, to argue that the punishment was disproportionate, that Charlotte had been equally at fault. But one look at William's expression told her that this was no longer a negotiation. It was a declaration of boundaries. The private meeting that followed between William and Camilla was not a shouting match. It was far more dangerous. It was a battle of wills fought in measured tones and icy silences, each word chosen with surgical precision. William was resolute. Eliza's actions had been part of a pattern, not an isolated incident. Camilla was equally determined. Her granddaughter was being sacrificed to prove a point, but as the conversation unfolded, it became clear that the dispute was about far more than two young girls. It was a proxy war for the future direction of the monarchy itself. The burden of history was evident in every exchange. William spoke not just as a father, but as the future king, the man who would one day be responsible for the integrity of the crown. He saw Eliza's behavior as a symptom of a deeper rot, a belief among the extended royal family that access to the throne could be used as a shield against accountability. Camilla spoke not just as a grandmother, but as a queen consort, a woman who had fought for decades to secure her position within a hostile institution. She saw the punishment of her granddaughter as a personal rejection, a signal that her family would never fully be accepted. King Charles, when he was finally brought into the conflict, faced an impossible choice. On one side stood his wife, wounded and furious over the punishment of her granddaughter. On the other stood his eldest son, determined to protect Charlotte and establish a boundary no royal connection could cross. The king understood the danger immediately. Supporting Camilla could weaken William's authority as a father. Supporting William could fracture his marriage, yet refusing to choose would damage them all. He remained alone at his desk after the advisors left, staring at the revocation order that sat before him. He knew that whatever decision he made would have lasting consequences. The aftermath of the conflict unfolded quietly away from the cameras. Eliza's name was removed from palace records. Her invitations were rescinded. Her place in the ceremonial order was erased. She felt the loss acutely, not just of the title, but of the sense of belonging it had provided. Camilla watched her granddaughter struggle to comprehend the sudden shift in her status, and for the first time she questioned whether her protective instincts had done more harm than good. But the most remarkable development came unexpectedly. Charlotte, moved by a desire to heal rather than to triumph, asked for a private meeting with Eliza. No advisors, no parents, no titles, just two young girls sitting across from each other in a quiet room trying to find a way forward. During their conversation, Charlotte placed the recovered bracelet on the table between them. She explained its significance not as a symbol of royal privilege, but as a connection to the grandmother she had never met. It was a reminder of love, not of power. Eliza listened, her defenses slowly crumbling. She admitted that she had taken the bracelet to hurt Charlotte, to strike back against years of being treated as an outsider. She had believed that every honor given to Charlotte was another rejection of her own place in the family. But as Charlotte spoke, she realized that her assumptions had been wrong. Charlotte did not feel powerful. She felt trapped by expectations she had never asked for. The honesty between them was raw and uncomfortable, but it was also liberating. They had confronted their demons, and in doing so they had found common ground. Eliza apologized, not for the sake of restoring her title, but because she genuinely regretted her actions. Charlotte accepted the apology, recognizing that forgiveness did not require the erasure of consequences. They left the room not as enemies, but as two people who had finally understood each other's pain. The public fallout was inevitable. News of the title revocation leaked to the press, and Britain erupted into a debate about privilege, punishment, and the responsibilities of royal children. Some commentators praised William for standing firm against the corrosive influence of favoritism. Others criticized him for being overly harsh, for punishing a young girl to make a political point. The Crown Chronicle captured the national mood with a front-page image of William walking into Windsor Castle with Charlotte's hand clasped firmly in his. It was a picture of protection, but also of division. For Camilla, the ordeal was a reckoning. She had spent years building her position within the royal family, carefully navigating the complexities of her role as Queen Consort. She had believed that extending privileges to her grandchildren was a way of securing their place in the Windsor world. But she had failed to recognize that protecting them from consequences had only made them more vulnerable. She admitted to William that she had been wrong not in loving Eliza but in shielding her from accountability. It was a confession that came at a cost, but it marked the beginning of a new understanding between them. William never restored Eliza's title, Charles never challenged the decision, and Camilla never again attempted to use palace influence to override the prince's authority. The monarchy had weathered the storm, but it had been permanently changed. The incident had established a precedent, a clear boundary between family affection and royal privileges. It had proven that William was willing to make difficult decisions, even when they came at a personal cost, and it had demonstrated that the future king valued accountability over allegiance. As the months passed, Charlotte and Eliza slowly rebuilt their relationship. They met at family gatherings, exchanging cautious smiles and hesitant conversations. They were no longer rivals protected by rank. They were simply two young women trying to find their place in a family that had been torn apart by ambition and pride. The title was gone, but the lessons it had taught them would remain. In the end, the confrontation at Windsor was not just about a bracelet, a whispered insult, or a grandmother's protection. It was a reminder that the monarchy, for all its grandeur and tradition, is still a family, and like any family, it must confront its flaws if it hopes to survive. The victory was not in the punishment, but in the reconciliation that followed. The strength of the crown lies not in its ability to enforce discipline, but in its
Camilla
capacity
pushed
for
the
forgiveness.
authorization file
William
back
had drawn a
across the
line,
table.
but he had also
Relationship
left
with
the path
Camilla,
open for those
but
who
it
were
drew
willing
a
to
hard
walk it
line
honestly.
between family
And
affection
in that, he had shown
and
the kind of
protected
king he would one
appearances,
day be.
while
Thanks
resentment
for
grew
watching.
unchecked.
Please don't forget
William's
to like
anger
and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.